Hello, nerds. Thank you for watching Generally Nerdy. This is the Week in Nerdom, your place for daily nerd news updates. And today, being Friday, we are talking about comic books. This week in comic books, there's a pretty giant DC Universe update. We've got a new book from Michael Bendis, and so much is going on in comic books, plus 3 reviews one more time. I was going to go for 4, but we'll get into that when we get in the episode and intro. This week in comic books, we are talking about the DC Universe app, and they just did a massive update, adding, quote, thousands of titles. It's more thousands of books, perhaps, but not quite thousands of titles. Looking at the list is relatively short when it comes to actual titles of books, but then you have the number 1, the number 2, so on and so forth. So what this update was supposed to do is, instead of being piecemeal for a lot of complete arcs, it completes the arcs from before, because there was a lot of fan outcry to do that. A lot of people were upset that they couldn't read like the entire Forever Evil. I don't know if that was specifically one of them, because I don't have the app, but that's just kind of an example. The other part of this that I think is really cool is that it's not, so if you have the Marvel Now app, or I think that's what it is, Marvel Now. If you have the Marvel app that lets you read Marvel books digitally, you can't read anything newer than 6 months old. So if it happened within the last 6 months, it's not on the app yet. But everything before the last 6 months, and I mean everything, is on the app. For the DC Universe stuff, though, they're taking bits from all of the eras of comic books, including stuff that has come out within the last 6 months. It's not complete. You don't have 100% coverage for DC history, but you do have quite a bit of stuff. It's all the way from Rebirth, all the way back through the Bronze Age stuff. Ugh, that's a tongue twister. So this is just another reason why, if you're like me, then you're regretting not signing up for that app. I just can't afford it right now. This, though, is not the same update. These are not the same books that they are allowing on the Comixology app. Some of them, there is some overlap. There is a fair amount of overlap, actually, but it is not complete. You get more books on the DC Universe app than you do on Comixology. But that's all we have for DC Universe. Next, we're talking about a new book from Michael Bendis. It's called Leviathan. So for those that don't know, the Leviathan Corporation, which I feel like is what it's going to be, some of the teases have hinted that it is a corporation. Leviathan was the corporation created by Grant Morrison and David Finch back in 2011. That was supposed to be, it was before New 52 even, was supposed to be the antithesis to Batman's Batman Incorporated. So it was effectively an international crime syndicate, whereas Batman's Batman Incorporated was an international justice syndicate, or something along those lines. Words are fun. So Bendis is bringing them back, and it's already started to tease. We've already got the lead into the Leviathan stuff in some Superman stuff. It's supposedly going to be DC's next big crossover event, though if it's anything like Doomsday Clock, it very potentially could just be a whole bunch of hype for a whole lot of not actually going to do what we say we're going to do. It'll be interesting to see what Bendis does with a Grant Morrison creation. just because Morrison's a little nuts. So that we're going to definitely keep our eyes on. Once we get Leviathan #1, which I believe it is going to be its own series. I'm not 100% on that, but assuming it is, we will definitely be at least talking about the first book in the series on the reviews portion for comic books whenever that launches. And then our last bit of news also has to do with Brian Michael Bendis. Kind of. It's more Brian Michael Bendis adjacent. It is Kris Anka, who is a longtime art collaborator with Bendis. Bendis being the writer, Anka being one of the guys who draws a lot of stuff for Bendis. He is jumping ship from Marvel to DC. His last book will be Marvel Runaways #18. And he will be starting with Bendis on Young Justice as of book #5. I don't think we will be reviewing book #5 on here. We did Young Justice #1, so if something major happens in that series, then we will jump back on, but there's too much other stuff to be reviewing to try and keep up with entire series. So primarily reviews are going to remain mostly #1s or the books that I am keeping up on weekly, or if something major happens. Like I considered doing Heroes in Crisis this week, but it still isn't good. There's still not. We'll get into that. Actually, that's the end of news, so let's get into the reviews right now. Before we move into the reviews, though, guys, I have to remind you about the Patreon. Patreon.com/generallynerdy. That is the place to go to get all of your extra nerdy bits. There are 5 tiers. You can jump on for just $1 a month is the lowest tier, and that dollar gets you early access to almost all of the videos and a monthly Discord where we talk about the upcoming previews issues for comic books. Again, that's patreon.com/generallynerdy. 5 tiers. The higher you go up, the more stuff you get. Everything from what I just listed to a second Q&A Discord session every month. And then all the way up to producer credits on every episode that I produce. So go check it out, patreon.com/generallynerdy. And now, let's review some stuff. So first, on reviews, we are talking about Batman Who Laughs #2. That's right. Like I said, we're not always going to continue series, but this is such a unique piece, and Scott Snyder is one of the better modern Batman writers. Tom King was okay. War of Jokes and Riddles was pretty good, but aside from that, I was not a huge fan of his run, and I'm definitely not a fan of his Heroes in Crisis. So the fact that Snyder's doing another Batman book is really awesome. This book, I'm not super familiar. I know I should be, but I'm not super familiar with Jock's art or his I'm just in general his layouts, anything. Let's jump into the second camera angle so that we can kind of get into this a little better. All right, so first of all, I feel like the best page to kind of exemplify what Jock is doing here is not exactly that one. There was, try to not show too much. Here we go. This is I feel like the height of the art in this book, because we go from if you're not keeping track with the Batman Who Laughs series, Bruce has been Jokerized. He's been hit with Joker toxin. So we already showed this page, so we might as well go back to it. He's using anti-venom for the Joker's toxin as much as they have, but since it's the one that's unique for Bruce, they don't have an antidote for it. They just have stuff that's going to weaken it and slow it down so that he can stop the turn so he doesn't become another Batman Who Laughs. So this page, like I said, I feel like this is kind of the best example of the good bits of the art in this book, because we have this him going Joker. We have him going a little crazy, getting a little nuts, and this feels like feels like an anime, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that feeling when we get into our third book for the week. But Jock is a little less. Let me get to an example of what I didn't like about the art in this book. Jock is a little less consistent, I feel like is a fair word. Here we go. This is the example of what I didn't like. So let me finish. I guess I didn't really finish that thought with what I did like. So we have this is Bruce in disguise trying to look like Harvey. So we have the obvious eyeballs here as well. You can tell these eyes are a little too red to be regular old Harvey. We saw Bruce's eyes were red in previous pages because, again, and then they're red here still. And actually, Commissioner Gordon refers to him as Batman. But we've got this emotion, we've got this little bit of crazy, we've got some interesting motion, actual motion in the frame, even though these guys, he's not really moving all that much. He's walking away here in this frame, and then the distance. Like, this is a really decent layout. As far as, and it's consistent too, but this, we lose all consistency. So we establish the look for the Batman Who Laughs. We establish, yeah, he's gross. And then this shot here of him behind the blind guy, like, his proportions all change. The foreshortening on his arms just looks weird. And then where he's killing these guards, again, he looks smaller. This person right here, this drawing of a person right here is not the same proportions as this person who's standing in the elevator. They should be one and the same because they are the same character, but it's inconsistent. That's not to say that it's bad, really. Just it takes you out of it. You can't really fully get into it. Now, the great bit about this is the consistency with the writing, but again, that is to be expected with Scott Snyder. So before we get any deeper into this, let's jump into the scores. So for the Batman Who Laughs general score, we're looking at an 80 out of 100. I feel like the technical side of this, the layouts, it feels like maybe there wasn't, I don't know exactly where there's a disconnect, but somewhere there's a disconnect in here, and it just felt a little off. It wasn't quite as solid as the first issue. So I couldn't give it an A. And then the drop in art quality, which we're going to get into that with the art rating, the drop in art quality really made it a low B. So we're looking at an 80 out of 100 for that. Next is the mythology. How does this fit in with the mythology for Batman as far as modern Batman goes? And this is fantastic as far as mythology for modern Batman. We've got a 95 out of 100. The only thing that kept this from being any higher was the open way it seemed like Commissioner Gordon was talking to Batman when he was supposed to be in disguise. He kept calling him Batman when the artwork, we can get back into this. The artwork shows that the other police officers were not that far away. There, you've got a good maybe 20 feet, and there's no indication that Gordon's whispering to him when he calls him Batman. So it just, it did that's really what killed it, is just not super consistent there. And then we get into the art rating. Now, before I bury it, 78 out of 100 for the art. I like I said, for Jock, I just apparently am not super familiar with his style, so it felt really uncomfortable at times. This, I feel like, because you're giving it a whole page, there could have been a little bit more, I don't know. This just feels like his style, and I'm just not a fan of his style, apparently. And all of this, you're in a surgery, there should be a little bit more detail, I feel like. and just the facial expressions throughout kind of feel a little lacking, though not terrible. This is still pretty solid effort. So again, 78 out of 100, which brings us to the enjoyability rating, and this is probably the most enjoyable book we're reviewing all week. For that matter, one of the more enjoyable books I've reviewed since I started doing reviews. So 95 out of 100 there. Easy A. The only thing, again, that brought it back was the Jock artwork. I'm just not a huge fan of his work. So total, we've got a 348 out of 400, which is pretty dang high. So obviously, yes, keep reading Batman Who Laughs. If you haven't picked up the first book, then jump on, definitely go to your local comic book shop, have them order you the first book and book number 2, since book number 3 comes out in 2 weeks, I believe. Our next book for review, as I scream into the microphone, is Fight Club 3, issue number 1. That's a little confusing. It's the second sequel to the novel in comic book form, so this is the first chapter, effectively, of the third novel. And I really enjoyed the second book, I guess, technically, the Fight Club 2 that happened last year, or a year and a half ago. That's not to say that it's the most coherent story ever, though it's Fight Club, so to expect a coherent story is probably ill-advised anyway. This does come from the twisted mind of Chuck Palahniuk, so, I mean, again, it is kind of to be expected that things are going to get a little crazy. We have a lot of carryover. Let's switch to the overhead real quick so that we can kind of explain this better. We have a lot of carryover. From the unusual layouts of the first book, but not as effectively. So this is similar to the way the first book ran. We have we really have no dialogue until the what is that? The fourth page. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, fourth page. So it's pretty good at kind of giving us a little bit of an idea of what's going on without even giving us dialogue. So kudos to Cameron Stewart for that. But just, I don't know. Where this is going, we don't really know yet. But I really dig the Trump Lloyd. We got that a lot more in Fight Club 2. It is carrying over, but again, not quite as effective. We get these flies every now and then on the one of the last pages, we get a really interesting vomit on top of it, and then it's shaped like Tyler, which I thought was pretty hilarious. So, who's calling him, or no, the narrator's calling himself Balthazar. So, just in general, the layouts are all pretty basic, nothing super crazy there. The artwork, though, is super consistent. It's slightly more polished than the last book, which I feel like that's what gave the last book a little more character, though it's not much more polished. So let's jump into the scores real quick. General score, we have an 85 out of 100. I feel like it's partially because we stepped back a little bit in art, and Chuck is just really confusing. So the writing isn't where it probably should be as far as like setting up a scene and giving us all of the context. It will come. He is very good at bringing that later on in the story, but just in comic books, it's a different animal, and I feel like a little bit more needs to be established earlier. So that, all of that said, that's what brought it down to an 85 out of 100 for the general. Next is the mythology. Being at, I would have given all of Fight Club 2 and the mythology score, I would have given it lower scores there as well, just because the first book is really self-contained and there was no need for a second book, so a lot of it kind of felt like you were stretching. So this one is even more of a stretch. We're looking at a 70 out of 100 for the mythology, partially though because there's no indication of where this is going. We see that Marla is pregnant. That is evidenced throughout because she's got the giant tummy, but there's of this here. I mean, obviously she's pregnant. She's holding her belly. There's so much going on. So that is going to factor in somehow. I get the strange feeling that Chuck is going to play like there's two different DNAs between Tyler and Balthazar. So I just felt really weird. So mythology, again, we're hanging up on it. Mythology is a 70 out of 100. And then the art, like I said, well, first, let's talk about that cover. That's pretty freaking awesome. That's not the main cover. That's one of the variants. But still, pretty spectacular. The art, though, is super consistent. There's no question who's who. There's no weird distortions as far as action goes. There's not a whole lot of action, though there is a little bit throughout. But even the little bit of action still doesn't distort anything. Everything is still really, really solid. So we're looking at a 90 out of 100 for the art. Would have been higher if it was as character. What's the word I'm looking for? If it was as nuanced, maybe, as Fight Club 2, but Stewart's kind of made it a little more polished, a little more shiny, and I feel like that kind of pulls back a little bit. It's not quite as stylized. That's a good word for it. Enjoyability, it's hard for me to rank anything Chuck Palahniuk does lower than at least a high B. This is an 88 out of 100. I really dig, even when it's confusing as all hell, even when at first you don't know what's going on, which is most of his work. You have no idea what's going on until about halfway through the book. Fight Club 2, though, really was hard to follow to the end. It might be the episodic nature. He's just hasn't adjusted to it. Hopefully, throughout the course of Fight Club 3, we will see that he has adjusted to it, and this first book is just a little bit confusing. That little bit, though, took it down to an 88, which gives us a total of 333 for this book. Pretty solid score overall. And then let's move into our last review for the week. And the last book we're talking about this week is Black Panther versus Deadpool number 4. We talked about this because on the cover, when we just saw the cover and had only the brief synopsis in the previews 3 months ago, it led us to believe that maybe Deadpool had won by issue 4 and was now somehow the leader of Wakanda, which isn't exactly the farthest away from the truth, but it isn't exactly what happened either. So this, I don't know. I don't know what to make of this one either. This was super enjoyable to read. The art, actually, the style of this art really makes it feel like you're watching an anime. And the voice, who's the writer on this? Kibblesmith. Who is Kibblesmith? I don't know Kibblesmith. Credits. Give me the credits. Credit page. Daniel Kibblesmith is the writer. He really has the voice of Deadpool pretty well. Like, a lot of the lines of dialogue. There's a couple spots here and there that were a little shaky, but a lot of the lines of dialogue, I could totally hear Ryan Reynolds' voice saying them. And, like, he has the inflection, the whoever the letterer is, VC's Joe Sabino, he also helped because the emphasis was in the right places. A lot of times I read comic books and they bold words for emphasis, but the emphasis is in the wrong place on the bolded words. I feel like a lot of letterers really screw that up somehow. This was not the case. I really feel like the lettering in this was pretty spot on. So let's go to the overhead, because we kind of already have, and get into a little bit more of what makes this book pretty great. So, starting off, we have the stupid ass jokes, because Deadpool is, Deadpool. So, Wakanda superhero chops off a dude's head. Yeah, just like I said, I don't do it any justice. If you're reading this and you're trying to picture Ryan Reynolds' voice, it makes it so much easier because, again, this writer has that down pretty well. So some of my issues with the art, like I really dig the pulpy stuff. We went over this with Naomi last time, not last week, because last week was the live show, but 2 weeks ago when we did reviews with Naomi, we went over, I really dig the pulpy textures when they add that in. So who's the artist on here? Ricardo Lopez Ortiz. Ricardo, you are doing some good work. Now, here's my one issue with the art in this book. Otherwise, this feels like a fantastic anime. It's just every now and then we get panels like this where somebody feels super elongated. Like his torso is freakishly long here, and his forearms as well. This is the only panel where this is the issue. There's an action panel later on. Let me see if I can find it. Action panel later on where it's kind of the opposite, and he feels, oh no, it's even more exaggerated. It's just his legs. We have this one here where everything's too short on top, and then his legs are stupid long. And then this action panel, this one's a little bit more forgivable because the movement of his leg makes it look like it's moving more, the overextension. But then you have the ratio issues, like his thighs and then his calves, like that. Just those little things kind of took you out of it, but it's only those individual panels. By and large, this feels like one of the Animatrix shorts. Just super, super anime-like and fluid and not photorealistic, but you don't need that in comic books all the time. And then my other favorite thing about this art is the anime lines that he puts in here. This makes this action feel like it's moving a lot more than it would without those backgrounds. So this background here, these backgrounds here, that all does excellent job of making it feel like the action is moving so much faster. So let's jump into the scores for this one, and then we can finish this week's episode. So the general score for Black Panther versus Deadpool, I almost flipped it just now. The general score for Black Panther versus Deadpool, we're looking at an 88 out of 100. Now the thing that's keeping this from being an A at the very least is the weird bit that we got in the first issue of this arc about the laser that T'Challa has that heals Deadpool, which therefore makes it impossible for him to heal. Now, I haven't read anything since the first book. I need to catch up on this, and so that onus is on me. I'm sorry if I'm missing something here, but there's no reference to that or the effects of that. Like, I feel like that's a pretty big thing to just mention once and then throw it away, or even potentially have mentioned it in the second issue. But still, by this fourth issue, it should be something that is still very much affecting Deadpool. There should be no healing factor for certain areas of his body because of the way they explained it in the first issue, and that's not there. And that's a kind of glaring omission. So that's what brought this down so far. So again, 88 out of 100 for the general score. Next, we're talking mythology, and by and large, the mythology here is pretty airtight. I really couldn't see anything too wrong with this, though this is the first time. It feels a little awkward, and emphasis on little, feels a little awkward having the Wakanda suit, the Black Panther suit, by and large, automatically recognize and become useful to Deadpool, and then the teleporting thing that he gets on the suit, which, I mean, we're still rolling on the overhead cam so we can show this. The teleport, see, this wristwatch thing just teleports out. Like, that seems out of place. At the very least, the last panel or the last page where he teleports a whole freaking mountain, that seemed a little broken in the mythology area, but that is still relatively minor, I feel like, in the overall story of this. So we're looking at a 95 out of 100 because of, the one weird bit. Next, we're talking about the art, and again, the art, it really feels like watching an anime. I really dig this art. I have been a bigger fan of much other art in recent past, specifically Batman Damned. The art in that, it is damn near perfect. And actually, the art in DC's Heroes in Crisis number 5 is really good. The only reason we're not doing Heroes in Crisis this week, or potentially until it becomes a trade, is because the story's broken in too many ways to discuss individually and until we get the whole story. So anyway, that being said, I did still really dig this art. It's just up against some really stiff competition. So we're looking at an 85 out of 100 for that. And I really feel like if those issues with the art weren't there, if the over elongation of the torso in the one panel and then the weird elongation of the legs in the other panel, if those things weren't there, then that would have bumped it up to a proper A. But as it is, we're looking at an 85 out of 100. And then the enjoyability. Like I have said a couple of times, the voice in this book is right on. The experience of going through this book, although, again, missing that one pretty big element of what they kind of set up and then threw away in that laser, aside from that, this is super enjoyable. This is definitely something you should be reading right now. So 90 out of 100 is the score there, which gives us a total of 353 out of 400. So our highest rated book of the week, which is really weird considering it's a Marvel book. But Kibblesmith really has the voice of Deadpool in this pretty well, and I feel like T'Challa pretty well as well. Just, I am not the biggest Black Panther reader, so that I could be a little off on. But that, guys, is the end of this week's episode. What did I miss? What should we talk about next week? What should we review next week? Let me know in the comments below. Do you agree with my reviews, or am I completely off base? Let's talk about that down low in the comments as well. If, though, you want to go deeper into the conversation, then you can jump over to the website, generallynerdy.net. That is the place that you can go find all of the freebies, the social media links, the general store. There's a tab across the top of the website. It says General Store. That's where you can go get your nerdy swag. All of that is up on generallynerdy.net. If this is your first time at Generally Nerdy, then please do not be shy and hit that subscribe button. If you liked the episode, then hit the thumbs up to tell me you liked it. Or there's a thumbs down if you didn't like it. No one's going to hate on you. If you are falling behind on your nerd news and you want to catch up, then you can click or tap that box right there to the left of my face to do that. And it takes you to all the wonderful things. But before we go and before we click boxes and do the stuff, guys, always remember that if it's generally nerdy, it's probably here.